welcome from participants from all over the world. I'm delighted and honored to be opening today's Feminist Political Ecology dialogue on rethinking food at the University of Passau. I'm very happy to welcome all of you. But first of all, I must raise the attention that this session is recorded for also our documentation purpose. So a warm welcome to members of the university, members of the WIGO network, participants of the Feminist Political Ecology dialogues, participants and students interested in the Sustainability Week taking place here at the University of Passau right now, and also welcome to the students from the Master Development Studies who attend the regular research colloquium on Southeast Asia, with a focus on Southeast Asia. So a very warm welcome, and I'm very honored to host this special edition of all these events, which has been funded by the European Union within the Innovative Training Network WIGO. So thanks also to the funders. And yeah, here we are at the University of Passau with participants from Indonesia, from all over the world, from the WIGO network. And we hope to have a very interesting first day of our 2 days event, Rethinking Food at the University of Passau. Today, we have the keynote speech of Parto Teherani-Krönner. And tomorrow, I also would like to invite you already now, same time, same place, we will engage with our research results and activists from all over the world to rethink food alternatives. I hope you can access the translation services we are providing to log into the channel of your language choice. We are here as part of the Innovative Training Network WIGO, our very beloved European-wide and international network on well-being, ecology, gender, community, which is an international training network to train 15 PhD students and interacting with lots of civil society institutions and universities worldwide. As you can see, we are engaged with certain fields of interest to understand how sustainable livelihoods are possible in the area of extractivism, for example. We are going to learn from Mai tomorrow about extractivism and the repercussions on food alternatives. We are also interested with the research of Inuit in southern India to learn about community economies and the politics of care. And last not least, the network questions entangled human and nature and culture relations. And with this feminist political ecology dialogues, we want to actually bring our research out into the open and engage with you, but also with civil society, and open up a dialogue and give a sort of a provocation to rethink food. We do this from the perspective of feminist political ecology. That's why we are here at the FPE dialogues. But what is this feminist political ecology? Well, it's like looking glasses. It's a framework of analysis, and it's a way of and a process of doing environmentalism, justice, and feminism differently. And this very much builds on political ecology to understand gendered power relations and also power relations beyond the gender perspective, but in an intersectional fashion. We further apply a feminist epistemology, methods, and also values. That means that our research practice is interested in itself in empowering social and ecological transformation. And last but not least, FPE is very much coined by an interest in engaging with positionality and reflexivity. That means that we as scholars or activists or a mix in between, we work with the communities, engage in collaborative work in the best way we can do. So this is also a challenge, but also a reason for joy and engagement and commitment. So out of this work and the network of many universities here in Europe and beyond, we today engage with food alternatives, and for that we have invited Parto Teherani-Krönner to introduce us to the topic, but also to underline why do we need to talk about alternative food practices. And we find it very important actually to demonstrate how food can be grown and consumed differently beyond a more monocultural agribusiness approach, which right now today has been criticized heavily by the Welthungerhilfe and many organizations preparing for the food summit end of next month. With our research and our engagement, we explore power structures in eating relations. And last but not least, we want to provoke and encourage by sharing alternative food practices, like we're going to demonstrate tomorrow in the second day of the FPE dialogues. And we do this by bringing together examples from all over the world. So we very much believe that we can learn from farming collectives in India for the situation in Passau, as well as we can learn from community-supported agriculture in Passau for the struggles of people impacted by extractive mines in Kalimantan, Indonesia. And for that, to understand and show that there's a very intimate relationship between food, social relations, and our environment, we want to learn today more about meal cultures. And I'm very happy and very proud to welcome Dr. Parto Teherani-Krönner here, live from Tehran, Iran, joining us here in Passau, not only as a distinguished researcher, but as a very, very dear mentor to me. So I owe you a lot, and I'm very honored to have you here today. Dr. Parto Teherani-Krönner has a colorful academic career to look upon, but not only in the sense of academic, but she started off as a graphic designer. I think this sort of really colors her perspective on the topic of food. She started after actually pursuing her schooling at the German school in Tehran, she achieved her master in development in rural sociology at the Technical University of Berlin, to move on to the Science Center in Berlin to dig into environmental sociology. And from then onwards, I might say she has been engaged with issues of human ecology and very much shaped this topic at the Humboldt University in Berlin, Germany, at the Faculty of Agriculture and Horticulture, where she has been responsible to establish the Gender and Globalization Chair. So gender and rural development and food security and food sovereignty have been at the heart of her research and her engagement in projects in Sudan, in Kenya, in Germany. And what is the outcome of this engagement is a very informative and inspiring cultural ecology of meals. Starting from the idea of meal securities to look into production as well as reproduction, what is usually sort of kept as two distinctive spheres. She brings together in an analytical frame to underline the embeddedness of food in the social and cultural system. And I think this speaks so very much to feminist political ecology that we are very glad to have you here to learn more. And I should mention also that as an eminent member of the German Society of Human Ecology, we also are honored to have you here. Parto, we are very much looking forward to your talk from Tehran live, and the floor is yours.
Okay, dear Martina and dear students, I'm really happy about such an invitation. And I'm also honored, of course, to now have this chance of meeting also all your students wonderfully from all over. And thank you so much for the introduction. I think it sounds much more interesting than I am, but thank you very much. Now, let us just start, and I hope it will work with my PowerPoint, and we will see. I think, of course, the Zoom meetings are always different, but it gives us a chance of coming together from all over the world. And I'm very excited whether everything will work from Tehran, where I'm staying at the moment. Okay, so let me see. Is that visible? Can you follow?
Not yet, no.
No. Okay, so let me see. So I have to go for Bildschirm teilen.
Yeah.
And then now we come. Is it there? Is it there now? Okay. So let's see. Okay, now it should work.
Excellent, looks excellent.
Okay, now I try to bring in a combination of different things and talks that I have given. And I titled it with Meal Culture and Gender. And I could think that this might be an adequate approach for your feminist political dialogue. And it might also be interesting for the whole discussion about rethinking food. Now, what are my issues? Why do I prefer the term meal instead of food? This is one question that I want to follow. Why is the gender perspective essential to food or meal security and safety? And then I think an interesting aspect, which normally was overlooked, is, of course, the culture dimension and the social dimension, the culinary culture, the social interaction, and the structure of a meal. I think the structure of a meal might give us a lot of information. And I think that your eating relations is very close to that what I would like to see as meal culture. Now, what are the consequences of this meal concept in rethinking also food, which is the topic of your, I think, workshop and seminar? what happens? It doesn't go through.
Sometimes it takes some time.
Oh, okay. No, it goes too fast.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I think for the whole debate, let me see. No, yeah, I'm here. The concept of free thinking here. Everybody talks about food safety, food security, food sovereignty, food culture, food studies, and food anthropology. I think that's quite interesting that meanwhile, the anthropologists have also started MA and PhD programs in food anthropology. And we have, of course, a lot of aspects like street food, fast food, slow food, and so on. The term food is used when we deal with human nutrition. The scientific debates, they concentrate on normally the quantity of yield and food production, like in the agriculture science. And as you know, I worked at an agriculture and horticulture university, faculty at Humboldt University, and normally they were only interested in looking into how much yield do they get and how to increase yield. On the other side, there are the nutritional sciences. They are interested in safety aspects, and they look into the ingredients and how many calories, how many vitamins, and so on. But of course, meanwhile, there are more criteria like ecological and regional criteria who are becoming more and more prominent. Now, as I am a human ecologist, a culture ecologist, I had worked with this concept of human and culture ecology for a long time, but I think also the food debate needs to be discussed from a broader concept of humans interacting with their natural and cultural environments. So this is why I would just mention the culture ecological approach. I'm not going into detail, but if you're interested, then you can follow it in one of my articles, the latest one. I had very much explained the human and culture ecological concept, bringing it together with the whole discussion about indigenous vegetables in Kenya. And there we were also able to use this concept. Now, here, I think it's good to know that humans' interaction with their natural environment and social institutions are important in order, and then the arrangement between social institutions and the natural environment, they are important aspects to develop culture and also, of course, our meal culture. Now, I don't want to go into this theoretical and conceptualization, but I think let us start with just a few very, very easy and simple questions. Just by asking, what do you like best? No, one moment. No. Okay. Now, what do we like to eat? What do you like for lunch or dinner? And what do we need for this? Of course, this is different between individuals, but also culturally bound and depending on the social groupings you are in. Now, if you have an idea about your meal, your dish that you want to prepare, you go shopping, and this is a scenery in Iran quite a long time ago. I took this picture, but here we have the Victorian market, not so far away from Passau. And we have the best ingredients that you can get. And of course, they are excellent qualities. And sometimes maybe this is not regional, but anyhow, you find the best vegetables all over. Now, meanwhile, I think that in Germany, it's not a problem to get all sorts of vegetables and food stuff. Okay. But even with the best ingredients, according to the latest food safety standards with regard to environment and ecological criteria, you might stay hungry. Why? Because then you have all the ingredients, but not a meal or a dish. So this means, what do we need to prepare a good meal? Now, if we would be here together, I would ask about your favorite dish, and then we would try to combine all these things together. Anyhow, clean water is something given in Germany and in many European countries or Western countries, but it's not always given in many, many countries of the global South. We of course need the ingredients, that is what I had mentioned before. And of course, again, it's not working so nicely as I wanted it to work. Okay, these are the spices. I need some energy to cook or to prepare. Then I need, of course, the technology. I need to have a place to cook. And very important, time. Who is doing it? Who is spending time on preparing? We need a receipt, we need the knowledge, what will fit together with what, and the cultural criteria for choice and valuing tasty and delicious food. Now, as I'm now in Iran, and for a long time ago, I wanted to follow the discussion about food security in Iran. And I came here and I talked to many scientists who were working in this topic of food security in Iran quite some time ago. And then I found that the translation was very interesting. Food security was translated into Amniyat Ghazai. Now, Amniyat means security, but Ghaza is not food, but a meal. This means, out of this translation, even, I came up with this idea of, instead of food security, of meal security. Now, not the raw products, but meals people eat should be at the center of alternative food security and safety discussion and actions. This is why I think we need a broader concept for meal security, meal sovereignty, meal culture, and meal politics. If you look for alternative approaches, and you're looking for, I think the meal concept offers a new paradigm and will be helpful for rethinking food. Food security or meal security, that is the question. Now, the term meal can encompass new dimensions to our nutrition debate. It will make a big difference in the perception and conceptualization of the issue of human nourishment and well-being. Of course, all cultures have developed their own systems of categorizing and distinction. In Iran, like in many other countries of the South, we distinguish between the warm and the cold, very much, I think, popular also in other Asian countries. And depending on the food, we also talk about our well-being, about our health. So these categories are very relevant for that what we eat and how we feel. All the normative systems, including religion, have recommendations concerning edibles and taboos. Now, referring to George Simmel, a sociologist, a German sociologist, more than 100 years ago, he gave a speech at Humboldt University, actually, and he was talking about the sociology of meal. He argues that all human beings have eating and drinking in common, but this remains a very individual act. Simmel even calls it an egoistic affair, as what we have eaten cannot be shared with others, and he explains this process in his Sociology of a Meal. According to Simmel's, others can hear and see whatever I hear and see, but no one can, strictly speaking, taste or ingest the same article as I do. Now, the sensual pleasure of eating is thus completely individual, but of course, always in a community. It is this antinomy of eating as simultaneously something totally universally human and completely individual that to Simmel gives the idea of his sociology of meal. Therefore, the meal, the Mahlzeit in German, is a social construction where sharing becomes an important cultural process in socialization. Unfortunately, this meal concept was nearly forgotten, and it did not become apparent in the scientific debate on food and nutrition, neither in the food security or food safety debates. So hopefully we will come to a process where we will come back to a sociology of meal. Now, the question is now interesting. Who is spending time? Who prepares the meal? And mostly it is the women. But of course, when it comes to fire, men got interested. The barbecue normally is done by men. And also there are special dishes like the kebab, and also in Iran, if there is kebab ordered, you can be sure that it's done by men. So they play with the fire. It's nice. Now, cooking is an art, a culture challenge, one of the very first nature-culture relationships. Eating is the incorporation of nature. We are part of nature, and we incorporate nature when we eat and digest. It becomes part of our body, transforming natural resources into something that we can enjoy. It is basic to all cultural activities. This is quite an interesting approach from the social anthropologists, because meal preparation is most of the food studies and discussions remain in the dark as long as these activities are taking place at home, yes. But interesting that Claude Lévi-Strauss, he mentioned that meals are one of the first cultural inventions. That means that without inventing the art of cooking, people would have spent too much energy on digestion. So when we prepare, when we cook, prepare the meal, then we have some energy for other inventions. And so the first steps to our human culture is beginning with cooking. That is very interesting, I think, also thesis of social anthropologists. Now, cooking is a female task as long as there is no payment to it, and women share in meal preparation, and the whole cycle of production, processing, serving, cleaning, etc. needs special attention. That all belongs to our nutritional, I think, process. It starts, of course, with agriculture, and here again, women have their big role and part to play, even if these data are not the very, very newest one, but we had a lot of different situations, especially in African countries where we had a horticultural tradition in producing vegetables and agriculture products. Here, their share is pretty high. And meal culture includes, of course, the hidden care economy. It compasses the whole cycle of production, like I said, marketing to the preparation of meals, including, of course, the leftovers. Now, the value chain concept that we followed in our project, our research project, Hortinlea, in cooperation with many institutions in Germany and also in East Africa, they only were looking into the value chain, but that stopped at the market or at the front door. but the meal concept includes the social reproduction sphere as essential in food or meal policy. I think if we would look into really also the whole debate on food security, if we would look at it more in the broader sense of meal security, then there are other dimensions who become relevant. Those who are worried about food security in Africa should recognize that 80% of what is consumed in Africa is produced and prepared by women. So here the gender dimension is very, very obvious, but unfortunately, it was normally not very relevant to the agriculture scientists. Now there are female crops like the indigenous vegetables in East Africa. And Mary Abukutsa Onyango, she's a very interesting scientist and at Nairobi University, Agriculture University. And she also says that in Kenya, 80% of these vegetables are produced by women. And of course, there are many, many different kinds of vegetables. During colonial times, these vegetables were neglected. They even became a sort of weed. So this is a classification that came by the British colonialist. And so Mary Abukutsa said, when she went to school, amaranth and pigweeds were ignored. The plant called spiderweed now has turned to spider plant, and black nightshade is called African nightshade. Until the late 80s, no one would talk about these crops. It's quite interesting, our research about also integrating. Of course, it was clear that we had to look into the gender perspective, but the meal culture, I think, was an effort of me to come in and say, if you want to do something for the food security in African countries, it's not enough to look only about the division of labor, but you have to look into meal culture. So there are also a lot of our students, and meanwhile, there is also a PhD dissertation that has dealt with this preparation of meals. Meal policy and culture, if food debate and agriculture policy and economy would focus more on meal cultures and not just on some particular market-oriented food or cash crop, then the whole ecological, economical, and social cultural process of food production, processing, preparing, and sharing would become part of our scientific reflection about nourishment. Not the raw product, but the culturally transformed eatables within a social setting will move to the core of debate around human well-being, which will be part of your talks maybe next week. All relations, I think, is important to think about it. All relations start with offering something to either drink or to eat or to join a meal. If you are interested in connecting with someone, you will ask her or him to have a coffee or tea or even go out. Mary Douglas, she is one of the seldom people who also use this term meal, deciphering a meal. Very, very interesting. And with a very simple graph, she was able to tell us about, of course, this story that she is telling in her article is about the middle class American living. But still, it's interesting. I think one could make a comparative study about who is invited for drinking and who is invited for having a meal. So the bigger circle, the A circle, these are those with whom you share a drink, for example, your colleagues and so on. But of course, if you share a meal, this is already a more intimate situation. And I think I would also construct a very, very small dot in the middle. A, B, and C would be the very little group of people that you invite to your private room. So I think the barrier to be invited in Germany is probably much bigger than in my country, where it's relatively easy to get an invitation to come by and have a dinner together or have something to eat. It doesn't need to be very sophisticated and fancy, but just to share is the most important part of the story. And not the what, but also with whom we eat and share is of significance. And this is because meal are ties that bind. We come together, we communicate, we change our experiences, we join our meal, and this gives us a feeling of belonging. It brings back memories and sometimes nostalgic, I think, visions. It's very important also for those people who change the place where they live, for migrants, for example, and to come back to their own old traditions. So there's a lot of memories within our meal. And it's, of course, of common and symbolic values. Our culture and personal identity sometimes is very close to that what we eat and that what we share with others, as well as a matter of social distinction. We distinguish also the different groups, whether they are vegetarian, vegan, or whether they are still eating meat. All are highly, of course, culturally bound, depending on the group that you share and you have your identity with them. Let me say that in the view of many cultures, I think, not only in Iran, but having no one to share with means poverty. I would like to underline this because eating alone, even in the best restaurant, doesn't look to be very satisfaction. Now, how to overcome eating alone? This is interesting, especially in the time for Corona, but also before that, the individualistic type of our culinary culture has some very interesting new, I think, dimensions, especially in Corona times. What people missed was lack of communication, accompanied by something to drink or to eat, to meet in a restaurant or in a Kneipe, or going to a cafe or a bar. So I think when I ask my friends, what do you miss during Corona time? Then they said, oh, we were not able to go to a cafe or to have a meeting together. Okay. Now, how to overcome eating alone? You can take a picture, meanwhile. Haven't you seen it? People going out, taking a picture, sharing your meal in a virtual world. Then you have this type of food porn and you share your meal. So you're eating alone, but you post it and then everybody knows, this is, and maybe you can change then the receipts. This is how now a modern way of sharing. It's not to come together, but you just post it. I think meals mirror our cultural identity, social interaction and relations, and it is a window to our worldview. Hani Rützel, she underlines that people present and express themselves by the way they eat. Eating has become a phenomena by which one communicate values, and then you have the preferences and the orientation, and there are these proverbs like, tell me what you eat and I will tell you what you are, or you are what you eat, du bist, was du isst. Now, our culinary culture is shaped in different ways depending on our culture. There are some individualistic structures of our meals, and beside the fact that we have the collective structure and the individualistic structure, beside the aesthetic and emotional, even erotic and sensuousness aspects. If you want to invite someone who just knocked at the door, but you have your schnitzel or steak culture, it is always one person, one dish. So if you have a family of 3 or 4, you buy just for schnitzel or 4 steaks, and everything is exactly counted. One person, one dish, and so it's very difficult to invite people to come and join. But if you would prepare something which is more collectively oriented, like a stew or a soup, then it doesn't make, there are also proverbs, you just put some water into the soup and you invite everybody, so it will be enough there for everybody. So it's also an I think, symbolic gesture in how we are able to be open to have guests and to invite people. Now, there is another interesting aspect that Marcel Mauss, he said that our meals can be understood, or let's say it's our interpretation, but it's very close to what Marcel Mauss has said about the gift. And this is that it is a total phenomena, a total social phenomena, and these total social phenomena, as we propose to call them, all kinds of institutions find simultaneously expression. It is our religion, our legal system, our moral, our economy, and of course, not to mention ecological consequences, meanwhile, seriously touching our environment and our habitat and lives. So we need to look into our meals from a very, very broad perspective. Now, sharing is a very important part. We learn it by socialization. And in many cultures, that was practiced because whenever someone had more for himself to eat, so he offered it. And even meanwhile, I think things have changed a lot in the global South, but I'm sure that still there are a lot of interaction that goes with our food, our relationships. We invite people, or if we cook a stew, then we pass it to our neighbor. If the smell is also getting to his apartment, then he or she should also take part, or even if she's not invited, she will get a pot with a little bit of that, what I had prepared. Okay, this is the concept of conviviality, which I think is also quite nice. And I think Marcel Mauss has been giving this idea of Gabe, le don, which is very close, I think, also in relation to the meal concept that I was producing and developing. So it means that we give something to another person and we have to accept it, and to return means that we share it and give it, for example, to someone else. What are now the consequences of a meal culture concept in your feminist political dialogue? This is what I tried now to go for. The concept of meal and meal culture is broader than the food security and safety debate, okay? And is not only about isolated items and quality criteria of the ingredients, like the ecological criteria of how it was produced. The production and the marketing, of course, is important, but the whole context of eating, satisfying, enjoying, and especially the communication of sharing and the narrative about nourishment, I think, is important to integrate our meal and nutrition discussion, and to be aware that what we eat is much more than only the ingredients and the quality of the ingredients, but it is more a social phenomena. Gender perspective, gender, race, class, as well, of course, as intersectionality, are integral parts of this meal approach, and meal or food research cannot stop at the household front door, like in the value chain. and the production as well as the reproduction sphere with the meal concept will open a new area of investigation. And therefore, I think my idea could be now visualized in this graph. If meal security and safety is our intention, we need to bridge and bring together different, I think, disciplines, but also different approaches. So one is, of course, the agriculture science. We have to look into the way people produce and the division of labor. But we also have to look into nutrition science, that is right. But on the other hand, we need the natural sciences as well as the social and cultural sciences in order to grasp this concept of meal culture, which I put in the middle. And I think that it will be an enrichment for this type of research to integrate women and gender research and intersectionality. Now, last remark, problems of hunger and malnutrition in the world need to respect the gender dimension. The whole meal cycle that encompasses the production as well as the reproduction sphere of meal preparation, serving, eating, up to the cleaning and leftovers. And gender blindness still is a problem, even in agriculture and nutritional sciences and policies. It should become more visible in life science. And hopefully in your approach at Passau, you will overcome this barrier to look into and overcome this gender bias. Should I also go through the best way of our nutrition, or do we still have time?
We do have.
Okay.
And if you, illustrate that with your leafy vegetables, I think that will.
It's interesting because we have audiences from all over, maybe from also Asian countries, but maybe also African countries. Now, the interesting result of a research, a comparative research, is that West Africans have one of the healthiest diets. This is because using self-reported diet surveys in some 187 countries, then they found out, it is a research in the University of Cambridge, that the way the people produce and prepare their meals, they have been comparing it and their nutrition, such as fruit, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, and so on, and fish, as well as foods containing fiber and omega-3. They also looked at the consumption of unhealthy food, such as sugar, drinks, saturated fats, sodium, and processed meals and meats. But if we compare it, we saw the one that I gave an example of the global scenery. But now the result is that people in West Africa, in Mali, Chad, Senegal, and Sierra Leone enjoy the healthiest diet than their counterparts in the United States, the United Kingdom, in Japan or Canada, according to the study published in the Lancet Global Health Spring. It's not the newest one, but it is interesting that at least until that time in 2016, they distinguished between the countries with the best diet and the countries without. So these are now the, let's say the red ones are not the one with the best nutritional situation. And the main conclusion of the study is that in much of the world's eating habits are getting worse. So this is an alarming, I think, information. Worldwide consumption of healthy foods have increased, yes, but in high income countries, many of those things that we know are not very healthy are being consumed, and often out paced by the growing intake of unhealthy food. So on the one hand, we have improved in the quality, but on the other hand, the consumption of that which is not very healthy has also increased. Now, this means that the vegetables, especially in many, I think, countries of the global south, they are, I think, part of their daily nutrition. And in our Hortilea project, also Maike Brückner and Suse Brettin, she is also now involved in Germany in research about the different types of local vegetable production, local communities. And Maike Brückner is the researcher that has passed also her PhD in the topic of meal preparation in Kenya. Now, street food, let me just say before, we also enjoyed, of course, street food in Berlin. And before Corona, it was possible to come together. So I think it is a key. Our food, our meal are key to our communication system and social interaction. And we can only hope that sceneries like this picnic at Thai Market in Berlin can come back in a, let's say, not so far away future. So I'm now at the end. Meal culture is a new concept in food security debates. And my article was being published in Medwin Publishers. So if you're interested, I can pass you, but I think you have it, this article. And in German, I had edited and published a book like Mahlzeitenpolitik, Meal Politics, and it's about the culture ecology of nutrition and gender. And we had quite an interesting, I think, seminar about meal cultures in Europe some years ago. And this you can follow in a homepage, Meal Cultures WordPress. And finally, I hope to enjoy a common meal together soon. Thank you. That was it.
Thank you very much, Parto, for this wonderful talk, taking us around the world and into the further conceptualization of food beyond what we ever imagined. So thank you very much for this super inspiring talk. And I'm really happy now to host the discussion. Please do just enter a little star, whatever, in the chat, so I can then ask you and facilitate the talk. Parto, if you close,
I have to stop.
We can even not meet, but we might see each other. And yeah. I also do welcome participants, if your connectivity allows, to open your video cameras so that we can interact a bit better. You may ask questions in, you may pose questions in German and Indonesian in the chat, and we will discuss in English.
Maybe Martina, you can take over and give me the questions. So
yeah, I'll definitely facilitate, and I'll look into the chat.
If there are questions.
Of course. So please just enter into the chat a little star so I can also follow the range of questions. What struck me in your talk is really in this conceptual enlargement of what consists or what refers to food, which has been super inspiring to really think about alternative ways to conceptualize food. With the meal, you sort of encompass also the very intimate perspective on food, that it's sensual and it's individual and it's also emotional. And you mentioned that meals mirror identities, so they're very telling in a way, but they also create identities. So how much are meals also may be an agent of change?
Oh, I think that you have already said the answer is very clear. Yes, of course. By changing our meal habits. Yes, we are changing a lot. And just think about just one aspect would be the difference between a very individualistic structure of a meal and a more collective structure. So if you move into this, then already you will have a cultural change. And of course, if you now are more concerned about environmental aspects and try to avoid, for example, meat, then again, there is a new group of people that become closer to each other, and they develop, meanwhile, a very special identity in the way they prefer meals, enjoy meals, and share meals. So it would be very difficult, meanwhile, to invite people with this different type of meal identity. So I know that a lot of people were telling me, Parto, it's difficult to invite, meanwhile, the family members, because each family member prefers another type of composition and meal. But I think the most important part for me is to come together and to also communicate about our meal. And I think that could be already an agent of change. If you organize, for example, a common meal, also with different groups, then they can discuss about it. Why not having sausages every day? Why not having kebab every day? Why not eating steaks, even if it makes fun to make barbecue? For men, it's very important. But meanwhile, we get alternatives to this. And a lot of science, I think scientists are meanwhile interested in also producing alternatives to our meal tradition in using meat. But for me, I would say, I would rather say, why should I take something artificial that tries to taste like meat if it's not meat? So there are different, but you're of course right. Of course, it's a mirror of our identity, and it will allow us to come together, but also to separate from each other. So this is probably also a problem of the future generation and our communication system. Yes.
Yeah, thanks. And we have a question from Marlene Gomez from Berlin, who poses a more conceptual question. The concept of food sovereignty, she asked, has also looked into the tiny space of the household, cooking and provisioning. What would be the difference between the food sovereignty approach and the Mahlzeit, the meal sovereignty concept?
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think that they are close to each other. The aspect is that I think if I would look into food security, and no, if you look into sovereignty, food sovereignty, there are a lot of very, very good and positive aspects as they want to integrate the local community. And so this is very important. But I think that the meal concept is even broader, and it's not only about the regional, because then I'm limiting myself as a researcher if I would look only into food sovereignty. And I think that we need still the aspect of looking into this issue of our nutrition from a very broad way. And I think the culture dimension has not been reflected that much up till now, and especially this communication system within the preparation of a meal, the joy and the enjoying of the meal together. This, I think, is not so much the main focus on food sovereignty, whereas it would become more important in the meal sovereignty approach.
Thank you. I also feel that sort of the embodied notion in Mahlzeit, in the meal, is quite a significant difference to food sovereignty perspective.
I mean, some people say that Mahlzeit means that it has to be very fancy, sophisticated a meal. No, if I would look into a group of people who join just bread and yogurt and cheese and some vegetables, that is a meal. That is a wonderful, delicious meal that people share. So it doesn't need to be very sophisticated, make it very complicated. So the Mahlzeit is whatever we prepare, but it means that it needs a lot of time, and it needs, of course, the people who take the responsibility. And we have a lot of criteria, cultural criteria, which are changing, but these are important aspects of our meal preparation and enjoying.
I'm happy to bring other voices and questions to the debate. I'm also happy to continue talking to Parto. But I do encourage you, students.
Someone like Paul was.
Oh yeah, Paul, please. Just open your mic.
Okay, so you got me thinking about meals in history, like the important ones, like Jesus's Last Supper, and in religion we talk about the body of Christ. There's fasting in Islam. So I was wondering if you thought about connecting like historical meals to your idea.
Oh, thank you for this question. Very good. As I said, all religions have their own rules, and there are a lot of taboos in every tradition. And I myself, I haven't investigated so much in this, but for a while I was looking into the tradition of religious meals in Iran. So during a period of time, these are 2 months where they are mourning, and it is about especially maybe among the Shia people. And it is combined with the community that goes demonstrating for Hassan, Hussein, Ali, the martyrs, I don't know which is the right term in English. And after that, they come together in the mosque and have a joint meal. And there are ceremonies where the neighborhood cooks and they distribute, or they cook at the mosque and distribute. And this is like a part of worshipping, and it is a part that they say this is very healthy food. If you get this food, you won't get any problems with your health. And so these are a lot of symbolic values that come with your meal. So of course the Christian have their own, and there are taboos, as you know. We should not, in the Muslim country, eat, for example, pork. And but it's interesting that there are very, very nice social anthropologist Marvin Harris has tried to explain why countries of the Middle East avoided eating pork. It's not only the Muslim, I think the Jews and even the Egyptian, they avoided, and his explanation is very close to culture ecology, human ecology. He explains it by very rational arguing that in that region where they have avoided pork eating, it's that the pork will eat the same as human beings. And they need a shelter, like they have to have a climate, a little forest, and so on. So it would be very, very difficult to cultivate and to use the meat of pigs, because then it would become very expensive and not everybody could afford to eat. So he is trying, Marvin Harris, to explain it in a very rational way. And he also explains why also the Indians, for example, have the holy cow, because the cow is much better and more effective economically and ecologically when we don't kill the cow, but use his products to bring the whole ecological system into balance. And it would be also a problem between the different classes and the social structure if a group of people were able to buy this meat and another one not. So it was out of a rationality and for a social relationship of people in a region that these taboos actually were introduced. And I mean, meanwhile, probably we will change also and broaden the scope of things that we might eat in future, but there are barriers, for example, of not eating every type of meat in Germany as well. For example, in Latin America, they eat hamster flesh. It's
or guinea pig, you mean?
Yeah, many pigs.
Yeah, sure.
And I think in Germany you would, I mean, my grandchildren would kill me if I would talk about this. Yeah. So, but your question is really interesting to see, and also the symbolic, of course, for the Christians, for example, wine and bread. So bread is very, very important. I think also in many other countries, bread is important, of course, in the religion, but also for social well-being, because otherwise, if the price of bread gets higher, then the social relations become a problem. And the political systems normally in poor countries try to limit and give even subsidies so to avoid that the price for bread is too much, so that still everybody more or less can at least have some bread to eat. Yeah.
Elisa is posing a question, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. Doctor, as you were presenting, I was reflecting to the principles and values you mentioned, the sharing, the collectiveness that this male culture actually tries to breed within our society. but as well, I was reflecting within our current political economy society, where we look at capitalism, principles of individualism, the privatization that is happening in the agriculture sector. So I'm just skeptical and wondering whether this meal culture will really survive these forces of capitalism, which promotes the principles of individualism and, trying to advocate the opposite of the other values which actually the meal culture tries to bring about, sharing and collectiveness. Do you think the meal culture can survive within this current setting, or we need to change actually the principles that are organizing our society to preserve those values of sharing and collectiveness?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, as I said, our meals are the mirror of our culture. And if the culture is changing into more individualistic concepts of living, being more, I mean, in Germany or even in bigger cities, there are more single households than families living together, many people joining. So yes, we will reduce the chance of sharing, but maybe we should think about it, that if we lose this type of coming together, communicating and sharing around a meal, we have to think about other cultural, maybe institutions that will pick us up. And I don't think that we will really enjoy the posting of a meal. Of course, I might be happy that my friends having a nice meal together, but I will always miss to be part of that. So I think we should try to think about institutions that will help us to join and prepare meals together. And for migrants, for example, there are quite nice examples in the SOS villages in Berlin, for example, that among the migrants, people come together and for 1 week, maybe for 1 or 2 days, this family takes over the cooking for the rest. I would recommend that joining a meal and especially preparing together a meal could bring people together. If we will lose this chance of celebrating together, enjoying a meal together, then we have to think about what comes next. You are looking into alternatives, and your alternatives cannot stick only to the quality. This is what I want to say about the quality of the ingredients. Of course, this is very, very important, especially with regard to our ecological dimensions of that what we eat. But all the other aspects, they are at least as important, maybe even more important than the ingredients. So yeah, this is exaggerating, but I want to bring it to the point that the meal concept is broader than the single items.
Yeah, really, thanks for pointing us to that. Yesterday in class, we discussed community-supported agriculture and the challenge of how to actually cook the things they're producing. And but it also shows, and I think their community-supported agriculture is a nice example that we might also rethink not our relations to the people with whom we are sharing a meal, but with the worms and the beetles and the plants who are also part of this community. So really think maybe a little bigger. I welcome Yani from Indonesia to join us, please.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for the very interesting presentation from you, Parto Teherani. Yeah, but this makes me also think a lot because I've been working also on this kind of thing. And recently, last 2 years, also working with the meal, with the community I work with in Bali. Yeah, I want to just share some information. Maybe it's interesting for everyone about the different culture practice.
Yeah.
This is what I experienced, for example, in Bali and in Tibet, where who are cooking, not only women,
No. Okay.
but men too.
Yeah.
And especially, for example, in Bali, during the rituals, and they have a lot of ritual of almost every day. And usually who cooks are male, not women. Yeah, so this is interesting. And also it makes me think about this so-called ancient philosophy or cultural or traditional wisdom of this group of people, where they don't see the, what is it, male, female kind of differences as being divided, you know.
Yeah.
But of course, it has its own characteristic, but somehow it is connected.
Yeah.
So some of this group of people I know also in East Java or in Sulawesi, in island in Indonesia, they have this so-called five gender system. You know, not only male, female.
No. Yeah, good, very good. Let me say something. My question would be, yes, men are also involved in cooking, and especially maybe in your case, it's about a ritual, like here when they cook within the mosque, it is the men who cook, because there are very big pots as well. And then there is also a distinction between whether these men who cook get paid. Do they get paid?
Oh, no.
No.
They
Okay.
don't.
And then of course it is as part of your ritual. That is interesting, that when it comes to either maybe a ritual ceremony, then also men will move in. The question would be, who is doing it on an everyday basis? Who is doing the, let's say, simple everyday meal preparation for the family, for the children? Who is doing it?
Yeah, this is actually quite flexible.
Okay.
Male, female, they can do. It depends because, for example, in the nomadic culture, nomadic area, who are busy is not only male.
Yeah. Okay.
And women stay in the tent. No, it's
no.
They have to work together and they have to do it together.
Interesting case. I know that there are also researches from one of my students, and they said that this division of labor, it became more obvious when people became a little bit richer, and not the poorest one. But it might be really interesting that in your type of nomadic, maybe tradition, there both women, men, and other, the gender relation can be very different, that everybody takes part in the preparation of a meal. But you should know that in most of the countries of the West, influenced by the new technologies, probably we have this type of division within the cooking and preparing a meal. And I know that Martina's very interesting research in West Africa, where she found out that the meal is a combination of a joint part of the man who brings in the stable, and the vegetable and the stew, maybe, and the sauces, that comes from the women. So the woman had also her own field with her own agricultural products, and the man who brought in the stable. So I think that is, the meal was a combination of both. The division between partly been taken over by the man and partly by the women. But that was the ingredient, but the spending of the time and the preparing, that was mostly done by the women. And your case is very, very interested. I would be interested to learn more about this very special type. And why not? Why not? Yes, yes.
Yeah, what I tried to say is, I mean, I know what you mean in the modern system or modern way of life. What you explain is like the tendency is the same, or maybe almost everywhere, you know. But there are still people who are still, you know, what is it? Live in their way of different kind of belief and different philosophy of life. And this is, maybe we have to learn about this, you know, to find inspiration, ideas, and how can we deal with our problems today, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do have further questions actually from the chat, two very interesting ones. Donna, would you like to share also live, or I'm happy also to share your question, how to Parto, how does meal cultures actually interrelate or critically engages with food system approaches? And then we have from Christiana a question, how does meal culture relate to the hidden care economy, conceptually wise, but also fieldwork wise?
Yeah, okay. So the food systems approach is also, I think, it has a lot of different aspects that they bring in. And I know that at Gießen University, they are very much engaged in this type of looking into food systems. In that case, I have the problem that even with the best and more differentiated aspects, then the research approach is not very much empirically oriented. Whereas I think that with the cultural and human ecological approach, one has really the chance of going and to look into the practical and everyday work, how meals are prepared. And at least to bring this into this concept. And normally in the food system approach, the culture dimension is not very prominent. Whereas I think that it needs to be more brought into the center of the whole food discussion, food systems. Yeah, this is one. And of course, the question about care economy, probably, of course, care economy is much broader than the meal concept, but it is a very important part of it, as we get hungry every 6 hours nearly. And so it is a very, very key aspect of our care economy. I think that without looking into the whole process of cooking, preparing, sharing, we will miss something. And don't forget to mention that even within feminist scholars, at least in many countries of the West, it was not an issue that had been discussed for a long period of time, because one says in German, maybe this is not easy to translate, but we have the 3K, Kinder, Kirche, Küche. So it is the children, the church, and the cooking, the kitchen, that feminists within the early movements of feminists in the beginning of the last century, they wanted to avoid these topics. And so this whole discussion about meal preparation was not very prominent because they were discussing about equal payment, they were discussing about participation. And so the whole aspect of care economy is something that is relatively then coming up late within the feminist discussion. And the whole discussion about meal or food is even later. So it has been a process that it came step by step, because the care economists and economists, they didn't look first into the processes of preparing a meal and the food, but they were very much interested also again in equal payment, or maybe even payment for the household work, which is still, I think, relevant to have something like valuing all that what happens within the household, within the private sphere, because otherwise we have always this division of labor, and still even in the Western countries, the wages of the women are much lower, maybe around 25%. Still, even during this time of the pandemic situation, where the people had to stay home, home officing, homeschooling, I think it was the woman who took the burden. And so she was the one who really was much more involved in all this care economy beside the outer economy as well, and especially for the whole household and the children, their schooling, preparing the meals every few hours. That is the time that they had to spend.
Yeah. Donna is just adding to via the chat that obviously there is a lot of work on food work preparation, social relations, but I think what is the really innovative thing of meal cultures is thinking together the production and the reproduction side, including feeding it into, in the very sense, into food security, food sovereignty debates, and really opening up the black box instead of sort of thinking about the farm gate as the end of all considerations. It's rather the whole complex. And so, thank you very much for enlightening us and taking us, having a look into the black box of the cooking pot, and and really inspiring us about rethinking food in a very surprising way and taking our thinking further. We hope to continue with that tomorrow, same time, same space. And let me just share my screen. So I'm sharing. I didn't want to cut off Parto. So we must all stay and return to give her the claps and the cheers. But I would like to really highlight tomorrow's second day of our feminist political dialogue, Rethinking Food at Passau University, to rethink food from very different perspectives. We're super happy to have Professor Gulay Chagla from the Free University here to chair that event, to moderate the insights Mai is having from Indonesia, Marlene from the food kitchens in Berlin, Dimas from organic farming movements in Indonesia, along with Patrick, and Inik from Inik looking into farming communities and collectives in Tamil Nadu, India. So here we will bring a lot of practices and alternatives to the floor, and bring them into relation to of our everyday life, but also of our intellectual pondering about food alternatives. So thanks a lot for joining us today. And yeah, and I would like just to mention that this is just the beginning of a wider series of events by WeGo. We will hold many more feminist political ecology dialogues in the Netherlands to look into the relationship of gender, environment, and sustainability. In Spain, we look into the redefining of a livable city. And UK is bringing us actually to the COP26 of the climate convention to discuss climate issues, justice issues from a FPE perspective. And last but not least, we look into Italy, how feminist political ecologies can be woven into real life context. So I hope you will join us for all these events. Thanks for being here today. Especially great thanks for Parto joining us from Tehran and sharing her very well-grounded knowledge and inspirational talk on meals. I think it will stay with us when we share the next meal, and I think it underlines how important it is that we reconquer the university in real to make use of our beautiful kitchen and roof terrace and cutlery and pots and whatnot to engage bodily with food and each other, and yeah, also sort of give our inspiration and our conviviality a chance to yeah, be the change we want to see.
So thank you very much also for inviting me. I really enjoyed it because I think Martina and we have quite a very, I think, nice history together with our researches that we have done. And so I'm really glad that such a broad audience and such a positive reflection about our food culture, meal culture is now coming up. And I'm looking forward for meeting you also in Sommerhausen. Maybe we can arrange something that more also your students and maybe other scientists could also come, and so that we have the chance of discussing more and coming really to a good conclusion for a new view, for a new vision for alternatives in our meal culture. Thank you so much. Great. Thank you.
Indeed. And yeah, I'm looking forward to meet you all here again and in person. Thanks for being with us and sharing your precious time. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.